Test. Control testing.
Ready to go? Good morning, everyone. Committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's hearing entitled Pursuing the Golden Age of Innovation, Strategic Priorities in Biotechnology. This is a critically important subject, and I am really looking forward to our discussion today. So we'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Since Mendel's first experiments with pea plants laid the foundation for our understanding of genetics, humans have been using biological principles to advance science and technology. From healthcare to materials to food production, biotechnology influences every industry in the United States. Throughout the 20th century, the U.S. has dominated the field of biotechnology. In fact, modern biotechnology is actually an American innovation. U.S. scientists consistently produce breakthroughs, innovations, and solidify our position as a global leader. However, I think we all recognize that the Chinese Communist Party is closing the gap in biotechnology. Our Chinese competitors seek to dominate the field and force global dependence on their manufacturing capabilities. In fact, in just 5 years, the market value of Chinese biotechnology firms has increased 100-fold and is now valued at $300 billion. The golden age of innovation for biotechnology is here, and it's essential that the U.S. be at the forefront, and that's why we're having this hearing today. With the help of artificial intelligence, our researchers are beginning to decipher the patterns that govern the complex behavior of biological systems. The tremendous modeling power of AI will allow for the direct programming of cells to perform specific functions just as we program computers today. Imagine the potential applications of AI where we have models fluent in DNA and biological molecules in the same way that large language models are fluent in human languages. That's why AI is poised to revolutionize biotechnology, accelerating discovery and dramatically reducing research costs. However, to unlock this potential, we must invest in the fundamental research and development that will drive the innovations of tomorrow. In an address earlier this year, Michael Gracio, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, recognized biotechnology as a national science priority, and I completely agree with the director. The government must enable American scientists to explore new theories and empower engineers to commercialize this technology. However, I think we all recognize federal investments alone cannot achieve this goal, and the U.S. must capitalize on its strengths. One such strength of our domestic science and technology enterprise is public-private partnerships. The federal government must coordinate with private industry to make complementary investments that advance science and technology. In our current fiscal environment, which we all know is challenging, we need to prioritize investments to protect the precious public treasure that's been entrusted to us. In April, the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology released a report emphasizing the significance of maintaining U.S. global leadership. This report includes numerous recommendations for this committee, which I look forward to discussing with everyone today. Importantly, the report highlights the necessity of a whole-of-nation strategy to unlock America's biotechnology potential. The National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology are strategically positioned to promote this national effort. For example, NSF has established 5 biofoundry facilities that enable researchers to rapidly design, create, test, and refine the development of tools and technology for advancing biotechnology. I was pleased to see the President's budget request includes continued support for these facilities, and we'll talk about some of the other aspects of the President's budget request. The NSCEB report also calls for NIST to create standards for biological data to ensure readiness for use in AI models. This recommendation builds on NIST's existing activities, which already provide reference materials for quality control, benchmarking data, and technical advice for U.S. and international standards development. Additionally, the NIST biomanufacturing program supports the U.S. pharmaceutical industry in delivering high-quality and low-cost drugs worldwide, including through the National Institute for Innovation in Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals. Federal investment can be a force multiplier that reinvigorates our biotechnology research ecosystem and guarantees U.S. leadership for decades to come. Whatever strategy Congress adopts, it must promote and protect American values while being flexible enough to adapt and pivot to take advantage of new technological advancements. I believe the U.S. can continue its leadership in biotechnology, but we must act now. and that's why this hearing is so important. I would like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to your testimony and a productive discussion on this critically important topic. I'll yield back the balance of my time, and I now recognize the ranking member, the representative from Michigan, for her opening statement.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Obernolte, and of course, Chairman Weber. Love to see a joint subcommittee hearing on pursuing the golden age of innovation with strategic priorities in biotechnology, and of course, coming on the heels of this incredible report that the Biotech Commission has put forward, which was chartered through the National Security Commission. And of course, all of our witnesses here today who are providing the fundamental research in biotech, we are absolutely delighted to hear from you. I come from the great state of Michigan. Dr. Techman knows a thing or two about what's happening in Michigan. And we like to boast that we are a global powerhouse in manufacturing, especially as we chart the course for continued development in the field of advanced manufacturing. In our state, we design, prototype, and build things. And we also grow things. And Michigan is home to over 800,000 agricultural workers representing a thriving agricultural sector. And just like our manufacturing, Michigan's agriculture is harnessing new technologies to improve efficiency, reduce losses, and pioneer breakthroughs in biomanufacturing, biomaterials, and of course, biotechnology. And this is simply what makes Michigan, Michigan. So for generations, we've succeeded by uniting innovation and production. We don't just invent new ideas, we bring them to life and we scale them for the world. And biotech is the next frontier of this story for Michigan. And as a sitting member of the United States Congress, I am dogged about bringing and harnessing and developing more biotech opportunities for Michigan, from our Upper Peninsula to downstate, and bringing together the critical stakeholders from university to small businesses to municipal actors, as well as well-established small businesses to the large. And with the right investments, we know that biotech can unlock new industries, create high-wage jobs, support rural and agricultural communities, and even help us meet environmental goals. So again, I'm so proud to welcome Dr. Stephen Techman of Michigan Technological University, our newest R1 institution, whose work exemplifies how biotech can solve modern problems and can uplift regions like northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. If the U.S. wants to lead in the 21st century, which we are clearly in and we clearly do, we want to lead in biotech, and we cannot wait, especially as global competitors are moving fast. In addition to this role that I am so honored to have on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, I also serve on the House Select Committee on Competitiveness with the Chinese Communist Party. We know that the CCP has been doubling down on their investments in biotechnology as a means to further their dominance in this critical technology of the future. They realize that biotech is converging with other technologies, in particular, as the chairman said, artificial intelligence, and is likely to form the basis of the next industrial revolution with a projected global value of $4 trillion by 2030. Indicators are starting to show that China could potentially beat the United States in biotech innovation. For example, they lead in the number of highly cited biotech-related publications on a country-by-country basis. They spend twice as much as the U.S. government on agricultural research and development, and they are investing heavily in biology-enabled warfare. When faced with this reality, you think the United States would respond by doubling down on research investments to support that innovation. And I will say what others cannot, this current administration is posing challenges to that reality, and they are not currently meeting that goal. So this past week, we have seen the proposed budget for federal agencies, and biotechnology is on the chopping block. The National Science Foundation has been proposed a $5.1 billion, 57% cut relative to fiscal year 2024 levels. And that includes over $100 million in cuts directly to biotech programs. Even before this budget proposal, the current administration terminated over $50 million in obligated research funding at NSF divisions focused on biological research. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, which performs critical work on biometrology, is estimated to receive a $325 million cut across the agency. So with that, I'm slightly over my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for obliging my 5 minutes, and I look forward to our incredible hearing today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the chairman of the Energy Subcommittee, representative from Texas, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Today, the SST Committee is gathered to discuss the current landscape of biotechnology, including recent advancements, challenges, and future prospects in this dynamic field. Biotechnology has the potential to revolutionize a wide range of sectors, but it also poses significant risks if exploited by malicious actors. We know who we're talking about. That is why the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act established the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology to provide a clearer picture of biotech's current and potential capabilities. The Department of Energy, DOE, has unique computing, biology, and data science capabilities that enable it to excel in transforming biotechnology. This agency has some of the world's leading X-ray and neutron sources, allowing researchers to study molecular structures essential for pharmaceutical development. Additionally, DOE is home to some of the fastest supercomputers on the planet, which facilitate the accurate modeling of complex biological systems. The department is dedicated to ongoing research and is skilled in maintaining well-curated, high-quality data to help the scientific community advance. This expertise, along DOE's network of user facilities, positions it to play a vital role in driving progress in biotechnology. Thanks to investments made over the past few decades, including efforts like the Human Genome Project, which was supported by the Department of Energy and National Institutes of Health, biotechnology has gradually shifted from purely basic research and potential commercial technology. It's evident in the Department of Energy's Bioenergy Research Centers, or we call them BRCs. Researchers at the BRCs provide foundational science to industry partners who can develop new bioproducts and biofuels based on their discoveries. These centers, funded through the DOE Office of Science, conduct basic research in genomic sciences and microbial systems biology to advance energy-relevant systems biology. As this technology progresses into more applied applications, we must be increasingly mindful of the potential negative consequences if it could have gotten into the wrong hands. We know we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. They are investing significant sums of money into the biotech field for traditional commercial uses as well as military purposes. In various technology sectors, we have observed that the CCP will not hesitate to exploit, manipulate, and steal research that they believe could provide them with an advantage, whether military or otherwise. I look forward to discussing how the United States balances the importance of open, transparent science with the need to restrict access to certain types of research. I'm also eager to discuss the recommendations developed by the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, based on its broad assessment of the current U.S. biotechnology research and development ecosystem. It is essential that we explore the innovative possibilities for the future of biotechnology to address key challenges and enhance national security. Now, one of the things I learned, Mr. Chairman, is to do some of that investigating myself. And the start of this week on June 1st, one of our esteemed colleagues up here had a birthday. Her name is Haley Stevens. So can we congratulate her? Happy birthday, can we? Mr. Chairman, with that, Haley wants me to yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. I think we'll eschew the birthday song. I now recognize the ranking member of the Energy Subcommittee, the representative from North Carolina, for her opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Obernolte and Chairman Weber, for convening this hearing today to discuss recommendations of the National Security Commission on emerging biotechnology and how we can continue to advance the biotechnology research and development ecosystem here in the United States. Just last week, I held a biotechnology roundtable in my district in the Research Triangle area of North Carolina. We had more than a dozen researchers, people who are in the innovation field, and companies that are very, very concerned. And I'll be sharing some of their questions with you as we proceed. I also want to thank our distinguished witnesses for being here to share your testimony and insight. Biotechnology is a field that spans from food and agriculture to energy, and it's one that enables and supports so many of our other sectors of our economy. It includes the energy-dense feedstocks that we use to make biofuels, energy-efficient crops that require less water and land to grow, and the bioremediation of plastic pollutants that chronically plague our waterways, as Representative Rouser knows. Emerging biotechnology are developing real solutions that will help everyday lives of Americans. In my district, North Carolina's largest research park, which I share with Congresswoman Foushee, we have an abundance of biotechnology companies working on these very issues. Furthermore, North Carolina State University is one of the leaders in biotechnology research, and I'm proud to support their efforts. During regular times, this would be a straightforward topic for this committee to discuss, but in light of this administration's ridiculous budget proposal to gut funding for a broad range of critical innovation programs, we're also forced to start considering the potential impacts from the rippling effects of these cuts. And I heard all about them last week in my district. The National Security Commission's final report was clear. The United States is falling behind China in key biotechnology areas, and my constituents told me exactly that last week. What we need to do is position our nation for success, to develop a federal strategy around biotechnology, provide adequate federal funding, foster innovation from early-stage research through the commercialization of new technologies, continue to attract top talent, which this administration is scaring away and shutting out, and we need to do this as fast as possible. This administration released a budget proposal doing just the opposite. A 74.5% cut to the funding of the Department of Energy's Bioenergy Technologies Office, a 56% cut to its biological and environmental research program, and then there are the untold impacts of the massive cuts to expert staff in these offices that Elon Musk's Doge helped organize. This level of funding would be devastating to our research enterprise, and if enacted, would essentially hand our leadership in biotechnology over to China on a silver platter. And for what? The sum of these cuts is a drop in the bucket of our federal budget. Yet they would come at a cost that will be multiples higher to our national competitiveness and will be felt for decades. We only have to look at what happened to our manufacturing industry over the last half a century to see that history will repeat itself. If we lose our leadership to China in biotechnology research, then we will start to see more and more scientific breakthroughs happening overseas with us playing catch-up. We also will have fewer startups, less private investment, because we have less innovation happening domestically, which means fewer jobs for our future students, fewer products being designed and manufactured in the United States, and instead being imported at a higher cost due to Trump's tariffs. The Commission's report concluded that China is using every tool at its disposal to replace the United States as the global leader in biotechnology. and that if we fail to meet this moment, our economic leadership will be weakened for generations. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Ranking Member Ross. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the representative from Texas, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very much looking forward to today's discussion on this absolutely transformative field. Biotechnology is reshaping nearly every aspect of American life, from AI-driven drug discovery and precision agriculture to synthetic biology and advanced biomanufacturing. It is a strategic capability that underpins our economic strength, our public health, food security, and our national security. Thanks to decades of federal investment, pioneering academic research, and a robust private sector, the United States has long been a global leader in biotechnology. In the 1940s and 1950s, American scientist Norman Borlaug, known as the father of the Green Revolution, developed high-yield crop strains that saved billions from famine and revolutionized food production. His work laid the foundation for modern biotechnology, which took off in 1973 when American scientists developed a breakthrough technique that allowed the production of genetically engineered human insulin. It became the first U.S.-approved biotech product in 1982 and has since improved the lives of millions of Americans and people around the world with diabetes. More recently, American innovation has driven rapid advances in biotechnology, from gene editing with CRISPR-Cas9 to immunotherapies and precision medicine. But today, we stand at a critical juncture as U.S. leadership is under threat without question. The Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, is laser-focused on global domination in the next generation of biotechnologies. Through IP theft, international talent recruitment, and civil-military fusion, the CCP has a clear strategy to displace U.S. leadership and using biotechnology as a tool to challenge our security, our values, and our economic future. We cannot allow an authoritarian regime that rejects transparency, rejects ethics and individual liberties to set the global standard for biotechnology. To counter the CCP, we must build on our strengths. The United States has the most dynamic innovation ecosystem in the entire world. To maintain our edge, we must ensure American innovation serves American interests. This means reinforcing our domestic research enterprise, speeding lab-to-market progress, and ensuring taxpayer-funded breakthroughs benefit America, not our adversaries. Federal R&D investments should align with industry strengths. They should clear bottlenecks and respect fiscal realities. We are not going to outmatch the CCP by copying its top-down approach. We will win by embracing what sets our country apart from the others: our freedom to innovate, our open scientific community, and the unmatched power of American ingenuity. Now is the time to launch a new golden age of innovation in biotechnology, rooted in American values, driven by public-private partnerships, and focused on solving the challenges of tomorrow. This committee has both the opportunity and the responsibility to preserve and propel American leadership in biotechnology well into the future. I also recognize concerns raised in the research community regarding recent proposals and the President's budget request. Let me remind everyone that this is just the beginning of the budget process, an opening proposal, not a fiscal verdict. This committee will review these proposals very closely. We intend to work with the administration to ensure America's S&T enterprise remains strong and globally competitive. As the GAO recently warned, our fiscal trajectory is unsustainable. If we fail to course correct, we jeopardize the long-term vitality of our entire science and technology portfolio. OMB's budget request seeks to address this reality and is the beginning, and I emphasize, beginning of a long conversation about how to meet this challenge. If we truly believe research is an investment in the future, as I do, then we shouldn't be funding it on the national credit card and mortgaging our children's futures. We need a sustainable approach. President Trump has tasked his science advisor to ensure U.S. leadership in emerging technologies, revitalizing our scientific enterprise, and fueling our economic growth. The administration, the Congress, this committee, and its stakeholders will now need to work together to chart a responsible path forward that achieves these goals. If we get this right, we will protect not only our scientific leadership, but our security, our economy, and our way of life. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to this conversation and yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Babin. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, my colleague from California, for her opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As with most of the hearings our committees held these last few months, we have an excellent panel of witnesses here to discuss an important topic for the future of the nation. And like most of these hearings, I anticipate the discussion to be substantive, engaging, and bipartisan. I recognize it's not just as central to the future economy of my own district in California, from agriculture to pharmaceuticals, but central to the future of our nation's entire economy. And it's here in the Science Committee that we help map out the future for our country. So I want to note my appreciation for Chairman Babin and his colleagues for continuing this substantive bipartisan approach to the issues at hand at the Science Committee. It's in the best interests of our constituents and the nation, as well as the best use of the time of these eminent scientists and leaders we ask to appear before us, scientists who otherwise would be in the lab directing their critical research. At the same time, as anyone who's paid attention to our hearings would note, my colleagues and I on this side of the aisle are increasingly frustrated that we seem to be holding these hearings as if all is okay in science outside the four walls of this room, when I don't think that's correct. The administration, aided by Mr. Musk, has been on the warpath against U.S. science. They have thrown around excuses, played on both imagined and real challenges in the research enterprise to take a slash-and-burn approach to our scientific enterprise. The consequences are already rippling across the nation. Abrupt funding cancellations to ongoing research and STEM workforce development programs, reduced graduate student admissions in STEM departments for the coming year, a brain drain of top U.S. talent to other nations or outside of STEM careers altogether, and a chill across the entire enterprise that is leaving young students asking why bother to pursue science. We're holding this hearing embracing the future of U.S. biotechnology leadership, but there's not going to be a big future if the President's attacks on science aren't stopped. Now, my intent is not to minimize the importance of this hearing. To the panel of experts before us, I'm grateful to you for taking the time to appear before us today to share your expertise and insights. I look forward to the discussion, and I would note that the Commission report, I think, is excellent, very helpful to us as a guide for what to do. I think there's some clear things that we need to address. First, we need to make sure that we have a nurturing environment for scientists in this country, and that includes doctoral students, postdocs, professors, career scientists. That's not just funding, but also a welcoming attitude. We have seen Americans born in other countries leaving because of the hostility that they are perceiving. That needs to change. We need to make sure, as Dr. Endy said in his report, that we're focusing on fundamental science. Let's not get diverted to a wish list of what we'd like. We need to fund the fundamental science that is the basis for all further development. I would note also that robust funding is critical for this. It is critical. I recently had a chance to visit with the Stanford Bioengineering Department. Fabulous work that is going on, and I wish this whole committee could go out there and see what they're doing. It is jaw-dropping and wonderful. One of the things that I saw there was a handmade sign that one of the students had posted, and the sign said, Orville Wright did not have a pilot's license. We also need to make sure that we don't overreach out of concern and over-regulate in a way that chills scientific development, and I think that sign spoke to that concern. So with that, let me just say, Mr. Chairman, I think this is an important hearing. I'm pleased that this committee continues to work on a bipartisan basis in an environment that is challenging outside of this committee room, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lofgren. We'll now move to witness testimony. Our first witness today is Dr. Drew Endy. Dr. Endy is a science and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, where he leads Hoover's biostrategy and leadership effort. He also researches and teaches bioengineering at Stanford University. Dr. Endy has served on several national and international bodies related to biosecurity, synthetic biology, and emerging technologies. Dr. Endy holds a PhD in biotechnology and biochemical engineering from Dartmouth. Dr. Endy, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your statement.
Thank you, Chairman Obernolte, Ranking Member Stevens, Chairman Weber, Ranking Member Ross, Chairman Babin, and Ranking Member Lofgren, distinguished members of the House Subcommittees on Energy and on Research and Technology. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Great news. If we want a golden age of innovation, then let's start with a simple observation. Biology is nature's ultimate innovator. Consider a leaf, these things that grow on trees. What's a leaf? It's a self-assembling solar panel that recycles itself. From an engineer's perspective, that's unbelievable. The golden age of bioinnovation starts with these unbelievable natural innovations. So what then about biotechnology? Biotechnology multiplies nature's innovations with human ingenuity. That gets us innovation squared. There's no other type of technology that's like this. You build on nature's innovations. Dandelions, bioengineered to have roots shaped like carrots so that it's easier to farm them for rubber production. Biopolymers, made for helmet visors that protect pilots from lasers coming in. Anything we can learn to encode in DNA, we can grow when and where we need to grow it. Now, how has biotechnology evolved? First, domestication and breeding of plants and animals for farming and food. Second, genetic engineering, now half a century old. Third, synthetic biology, letting us put biology together in powerful new ways, starting with DNA. These three waves of biotechnology are each amazing, but in the context of innovation, they're overlapping and synergizing. For me, as amazing as biotech is right now, it feels like what I imagine computing felt like in 1975. Back then, we thought computers were mostly big and in rooms without windows. But innovations like packet switching networks, the ARPANET, and the computer becoming personal were right in front of us. And suddenly, computers became connected and all over. The biotic future will be defined not only by what we know, but by new dimensions of strategic innovation, akin to what happened over the last 50 years in computing. Generative biology, haven't heard those words yet, but that's what happens when you put AI in front of synthetic biology. Fully mature biotechnology. You think you need labs for bioengineering, but that's just because we haven't fully figured out the engineering yet. What happens when bioengineering just works? That's in front of us. Networked biotechnology, a bionet, if you will, that lets people access DNA code and download and deploy useful biological solutions to solve local problems. Pervasive and personal biotechnology. Biotech's just not in tanks only or in big fields over there. Maybe it's around us and on us. Bioluminescent petunias are for sale. My kids love them as night lights. They work really well. Golden age straight ahead. Not quite. We got two big challenges, in my opinion. First, we're at risk of losing this bigger picture that biotech's just more of the same incremental, hey, we're gonna manage the bioeconomy for 3% growth next year. We go down that path, you just miss the big picture. And then the other challenge, as mentioned, China's locked in on biotech for their own reasons. And they've taken an all-of-nation approach and are steamrolling the field. The latter issue creates significant risks, and for reasons that are important to understand. Competition in biotechnology is not just a race where if you fall behind, you get to catch up later. It's a race where when you get a lead, you get to accelerate faster. Competition in biotechnology also involves one-time, winner-take-all accomplishments. What do I mean by this? How about a Sputnik moment for biotechnology? Well, that would be constructing a simple cell. How about a Unix moment for biotechnology? Well, that would be an operating system for life that makes it easy to bioengineer. How about biotechnology's PC moment? Well, that would be reliable local production of anything encoded. You've heard of the PC, how about the PB? I tell my students, maybe somebody should start a company called Banana to follow Apple, if you get my drift. How about biotech's ChatGPT moment? Large language models that enable all to access whatever DNA they want. The key, as mentioned, is to invest in the foundations. If we win, we get a safe, secure, and flourishing America fully powered by biotech. The economic promise is up to $30 trillion by mid-century. How much is that worth in terms of upfront innovation investment? Let's get at it. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Endy. Our next witness is Ms. Deborah Gracio. Ms. Gracio is the Associate Laboratory Director of National Security at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. She previously served as the Chief Operating Officer of National Security at PNNL. Ms. Gracio has also held various leadership and advisory roles across national labs, academic institutions, and professional organizations. Ms. Gracio holds an MS and a BS in electrical engineering from Washington State University. Ms. Gracio, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Weber, Chairman Obernolte, Ranking Member Ross, Ranking Member Stevens, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Deb Gracio, and I'm the Associate Laboratory Director for National Security Directorate at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. In this role, I oversee a staff of over 1,700 professionals who are focused on using our scientific capabilities to address some of our nation's most challenging and complex problems in national security. The report published by the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology provides an excellent overview of the current state of U.S. biotechnology and an urgent warning about what will happen if we continue to fall behind in biotechnology innovation. The recommendations in this report, although focused on biotechnology, are consistent with the findings in the most recent National Defense Strategy and the annual threat assessment from the U.S. intelligence community. These reports highlight that China is using a whole-of-government approach to become a global leader in bioscience and biotechnology with significant implications to agriculture, medicine, manufacturing, the economy, and ultimately our national security. The DOE national laboratories have a long history of integrating cutting-edge science and national security. It was gratifying to see the role of the labs and our deep expertise in biotechnology called out in this report. The national laboratories stand ready to serve the nation to develop the most promising innovations and address the most challenging problems we face today and into the future. The current revolution in biotechnology has been enabled by a convergence of disciplines: biology, computing, and data science. 3 areas where the Department of Energy and the national labs are exceptionally strong. For the past 3 decades, DOE's Office of Science, Biological and Environmental Research Programs, BER for short, have focused on furthering a predictive understanding of complex biological systems through a combination of experiment, advanced computing, and data analytics. BER-supported research has been foundational to advances in biotechnology, as have the DOE's flagship scientific user facilities, such as the Joint Genome Institute at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, providing DNA sequencing technologies to industry and academia. The Environmental Molecular Sciences Laboratory at my lab, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which supports the scientific community in their understanding, prediction, and control of function in biological systems, and the leadership class computing facilities at Oak Ridge and Argonne National Laboratories, and the National Energy Scientific Computing Facility at Lawrence Berkeley, all supported by the DOE Office of Advanced Scientific Computing Research. Technologies developed at the DOE laboratories and user facilities are driving biotechnology advancements to the U.S.-based companies through commercialization and licensing. For example, from 2007 to today, the DOE Bioenergy Research Centers have generated more than 1,000 inventions, generated 300 patents and spawned more than 24 startup companies. Through funding from BER, researchers in Emsl are developing a high-throughput automated biological characterization capability that allows us to quickly and systematically understand and harness microbial systems to produce valuable chemicals, materials, and fuels. This automated capability leverages technologies for precisely measuring biological molecules, and it was transitioned to commercial industry over a decade ago. Data is one of the greatest currencies of our scientific economy, and the Bioenergy Research Centers, Emsl, and the Joint Genome Institute, and other DOE-supported user facilities and projects generate massive amounts of data. This data can be used as the foundation for the web of biological data recommended by the report. As autonomous laboratories accelerate the rate at which data is generated, AI will create new opportunities for data exploration and discovery. The report recognized biological data as a strategic resource that requires both standards and security. Accomplishing these outcomes will require new security models, advanced data science, and techniques to federate data across networks of systems. These advanced data technologies are necessary to mine the vast data sources to accelerate the discovery and translation of biological systems to useful technological outcomes. Working in national security, I particularly valued the emphasis that the report placed on security. The national laboratories welcome the opportunity to help define new protection mechanisms for biotechnology data and to utilize a systems-based approach to understand and mitigate the risks of technology weaponization. We also understand the importance of ensuring that the nation realizes the benefit of technology. DOE has a track record of promoting open innovation while building secure systems to protect sensitive and classified information, performing analyses to understand potential adverse or unintended consequences. Collaboration with the broader scientific community is critical to achieving broad advancements in biotechnology. The national laboratories are well-versed in adapting these advancements in support of other federal agencies' mission in biodetection and biodefense. As the Commission report emphasizes, the United States cannot afford to lose the biotechnology revolution. Research sponsored by DOE and performed at the DOE National Laboratories has been fundamental to biotechnology innovation for decades and will be a critical tool for securing our future competitiveness. The Commission reports recommendations to expand biotechnology research at DOE National Laboratories and to utilize the laboratories to develop mitigations for biotechnology risks and to counter its weaponization are prudent and timely. We welcome the opportunity to continue to assist in these important areas. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gracio. Our next witness is Dr. Stephen Techman, an Associate Professor of Environmental Microbiology in the Department of Biological Sciences at Michigan Technological University. He is also the Associate Director of the Great Lakes Research Center at Michigan Tech. Dr. Techman holds a PhD from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the Institute for Marine and Environmental Technology. Dr. Techman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
First, thank you, Chairman Obernolte, Chairman Weber, and Chairman Babin, as well as Ranking Member Stevens, Ranking Member Ross, and Ranking Member Lofgren, and the rest of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm Steve Techman, an Associate Professor of Environmental Microbiology and an Associate Director of the Great Lakes Research Center at Michigan Technological University. Founded in 1885, Michigan Tech's authorizing statute charges the university to promote the welfare of industry. At Michigan Tech, my lab aims to harness the power of biology to develop biotechnological solutions to many challenges facing society today. In a drop of water or a teaspoon of soil, there are millions of microbial cells representing thousands of microbial species. These diverse and ubiquitous microorganisms perform many chemical reactions that are of interest in biotechnology. We're now able to harness these biological catalysts to more efficiently create products, break down pollutants, and improve manufacturing. My colleagues and I are exploring fundamental principles that govern the behavior of these microorganisms and how to apply those to develop industrial processes that can benefit society. My colleagues and I have been working on several projects aiming to use microbial biotechnology to convert waste streams into valuable products. One such example that my research group has been working on is a project funded by DARPA and other federal agencies to contribute to tackling the problem of excess plastic waste by developing biological methods for converting mixed plastic waste into high-value products, such as petroleum, lubricants, and even food. We've taken packaging material from meals ready to eat, or MREs, and successfully converted them into pyrolysis gas, which can be used as a fuel, lubricants, and even edible protein powder. Rather than burning this waste in the field, we now have the ability to convert these wastes into valuable products where they're needed. In addition to technology for waste to chemical production, biology can also be used in recovery of critical minerals. My research group is collaborating with others at Michigan Tech on projects that use microbial communities derived from natural settings for recovery of critical minerals from low-grade ores. Picture the ability to take waste from an old mine and use a microbial community to extract high-value, high-purity minerals. The renewable nature of biology makes biomining an appealing emerging biotechnology. These are just some examples of the ways that biotechnology has the potential to advance manufacturing and provide solutions to complex problems. The university has a key role to play in advancing biotechnology and the bioeconomy. That role is both in training the future biotechnology workforce, as well as research that provides fundamental knowledge that's applied to solving real-world problems. This mindset is core to the DNA of Michigan Tech. Michigan Tech is charged with advancing knowledge that's applicable. This mission reaches back to our enabling legislation in 1885, which charged us to explore the application of science to industry and to promote the welfare of the industries of the state. In order to engineer biology for biotechnology, we need to know how biology works at a very basic level. We need to view fundamental research as an investment in applied research. Further investment in basic science enables biotechnological advances. Many of the projects that I am working on, as well as colleagues, are fundamental research. We're seeking to gain deep insights into how microorganisms and microbial communities function. But this information sets the stage for us to be able to then engineer these systems to improve their operation and work to scale these processes to the point that they can be transitioned to those that might be interested in using this technology. We also need to continue to create ecosystems where basic research is used to address societal needs, and then there are pathways for transitioning that technology rapidly to market. This close relationship between basic science and application in university biotechnology research not only advances science, but also de-risks technologies on their way to commercialization. We're rapidly gaining insights into how to engineer and use biology for an incredible number of applications. Robust basic science leading to advanced biotechnology will enable America to continue to be a leader in emerging biotechnology. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Dr. Techman. Our final witness today is Dr. Kelvin Lee. Dr. Lee serves as the director of the National Institute for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals. Dr. Lee is also the Gore Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware. He has held several academic and leadership roles in biotechnology across top institutions and has received numerous honors for his contribution to the field. Dr. Lee holds a PhD in chemical engineering from Caltech. And as a fellow Caltech alum, let me opine that we are underrepresented here on Capitol Hill. Dr. Lee, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you. Chairs Babin, Obernolte, Weber, and ranking members Lofgren, Stevens, and Ross, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Kelvin Lee, Institute Director at NIMBLE, the National Institute for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals, a Commerce NIST-sponsored manufacturing innovation institute, one of 18 in the Manufacturing USA network. NIMBLE is a public-private partnership focused on biopharmaceutical manufacturing innovation, the technologies and workforce needed to leverage the power of biology to make life-saving medicines. NIMBLE de-risks biomanufacturing innovations by partnering industry stakeholders, large and small, with academics and federal scientists to collaboratively innovate while also building a U.S. biomanufacturing workforce. While the U.S. is considered a research leader in biopharma, we have not successfully captured enough of the benefits of domestic manufacturing. U.S. biopharma manufacturing productivity was 40% lower in 2020 than in 2006, a bigger drop than any other manufacturing sector. Manufacturing has been central to America's economic power and national security. But over the past 2 decades, we've lost our leadership position, especially in advanced manufacturing. In 1980, the U.S. manufactured over 40% of global high-tech goods. Today, only 18%. We invent things here, but then they're made elsewhere and imported. Unfortunately, our history is marked by initial leadership in advanced industries only to subsequently lose our competitive advantage to other countries with more effective industrial policy. Telecom, semiconductors, solar panels, just to name a few. We must act now to preserve and advance our position in biotech and compete with others that are pursuing strategic approaches to techno-economic leadership. By way of an analogy, it's as if we're getting ready for the football season, knowing that the team that wins the championship is going to have decades of security, power, wealth, and prosperity. We need to act now to be ready for the competition ahead of us. Today, we lead in only 7 out of 64 critical technologies, whereas 2 decades ago, we led in 60 out of 64. We need policies that provide significant investments or risk being dominated in these fields, including biotechnology. It's like in the quest to win that football championship, the competitor is already fielding one of the strongest teams with a proven playbook and a deep bench of great players and coaches that already outperform others. The U.S. has been a leader in basic life science research, for example, leading the Human Genome Project. Our science agencies support foundational work that fuels the innovation pipeline. These early investments and the subsequent products created have led to decades of prosperity and security. It's as if our team certainly has had success in the past. However, as the NSCEB report highlights, our innovation edge is eroding. My written testimony includes several measures that indicate we are behind in the quality and quantity of biotech R&D. Highly cited research publications, patents, workforce, R&D laboratories, clinical trials, and so on. One investment bank predicts that China will dominate the generation of new medicines for cancer and autoimmune disease. It's as if our competitor is running more plays and scoring more touchdowns than us. We must increase the investment in basic research to grow the pipeline of discoveries that turn into products essential for our security and prosperity. These investments will also create the skilled workforce needed to be a global leader. We can't expect to have that winning team without solid draft picks, training camp, and a strong start to every game. Many promising innovations fail to reach the market because they can't cross the so-called valley of death. Failure not because they lack merit, but because they lack support. Federal programs such as the Manufacturing USA program accelerate the translation of research through scale-up and commercialization. A team, after all, can't expect to win without investing in some experienced veterans, coaches, and a culture of playing the second half strong of every game. So what's to be done to recapture U.S. leadership in biotech? We must ensure a coordinated and strategic approach to biotech activities within the government. Biotech cuts across agency missions. We need a quarterback. We must significantly increase federal support for basic research to strengthen our pipeline, leading to products, prosperity, and our protection. Our investment will also help us shape global standards and ensure we are a destination for talent. We can't win without great players. We must increase support for technology scale-up initiatives and invest in the creation of scale-up demonstration facilities to accelerate innovation and leverage the unique strengths of our public and our private sectors. We need strengthened training facilities effectively to ensure that our players can finish each game strong. We must invest in a range of workforce development programs from blue-collar STEM jobs in manufacturing to white-collar STEM jobs in research to ensure that we have the needed talent pool. Everyone on our team has to be prepared to execute their role. We must secure and protect our biotech supply chains to ensure resilience in times of crisis and conflict. We can't rely on the other team's equipment manager for our cleats and shoes. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective. Our history as biotech leaders was achieved through research investment, academic industry partnerships, a dedicated workforce, and a great innovation system. However, technologies are advancing and the world is changing. As Marv Levy, Buffalo Bills Hall of Fame head coach, said, if you don't change with the times are going to change you. Or, as the NSCEB report noted, countries that win the innovation race tend to win actual wars too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Appreciate all the football analogies. We'll now move on to questions from the panel. We'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Gracio, I'd like to start with you. I was honored to chair last year the House Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, and one of the things that we were most concerned about is putting in place some regulatory structure to protect Americans against the malicious use of AI. And there are few of those malicious uses that are more concerning than those in biotech. So on the one hand, we have a situation where we're in an exciting time of innovation where AI is going to be trained on DNA and molecules in the same way that we're training today on large language models and language, and it's going to democratize access to a lot of the ability to do this bioengineering. But on the other hand, in the wrong hands, that could really lead to some disastrous consequences in terms of biotech and its impact on Americans. So how would you suggest we best protect against those risks while still allowing the use of AI to make innovation and biotechnology thrive?
Thank you, Chairman Obernolte. AI is the biggest advancement we've had in many generations, and the standards and the regulatory actions that are being put in place could hinder the access and the ability to move AI forward. But at the same time, we need to build guardrails that help us understand how AI can be used to make changes. And when used now for, as you said, democratizing access to the biotechnology capabilities, it's critically important we understand the dual use that biotechnology can have in this world. And so understanding what those guardrails are, what the unintended consequences could be of these biotechnologies will be a critical part of leveraging AI in developing and manufacturing new generations of technologies. The dual use is a critical component of the national security piece here. And so understanding how those the unintended consequences or the abnormal behaviors that can be created.
Thank you. Dr. Endy, I had a question for you. I was very interested in your testimony to hear you say that biotech today feels like computing did in 1975. And the reason why I found that very interesting is that 1975 was really, pre-internet. That was when computing was a technological curiosity. It hadn't even been democratized. You didn't have home computers yet. It was something that was done only in academic settings. And at that time, we couldn't really even envision the changes that computing and the internet were going to bring to society. There was a study done last year in graduating high school seniors that asked them the #1 career field that they aspired to, and the #1 career field for graduating seniors last year was social media influencer. And so not talking for a moment about the disturbing things that says about our society, I'm struck like how you would even articulate what a social media influencer was and what one did in 1975. So can you talk about biotechnology, if this is 1975 in biotech terms, like what are the transformative effects on society and our economy that biotechnology is going to bring in the next few years?
Last year, thank you for your question. Last year, I had 3 bioengineered organisms arrive at my house, not as a researcher, but as an American, as a consumer. I bought them off the internet. One was a bioluminescent petunia grown in Michigan. The other was a tomato that expresses genes from a blueberry to make lots of antioxidants, so maybe you have a lower chance of getting cancer. That was the first time I grew tomatoes. And then the last one was a little probiotic microbe. It's got 4.4 stars on Amazon that you're supposed to drink before you drink, so you're less likely to get a hangover. And I didn't try that, but it's in the kitchen. So when I'm imagining, it's like 1975. It's not that I'm just imagining. It's because on the front lines of bioengineering, we're having these new experiences. The impact of those bioluminescent petunias on our children was it made them think biotechnology was cool, that it was okay. And that was different than what they had learned in Palo Alto Elementary School, where they had learned that GMOs were evil. It was only by having a firsthand experience of working with biotechnology that they could see it in a new light.
Well, thank you very much. And let me just suggest that in the interest of science, I think you're obligated to try the hangover microbe. Well, I see that I'm out of time. We'll submit my remaining questions for the records. We'll go to the ranking member, Congresswoman Stevens, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Dr. Techman, thank you for being here to represent the important work that Michigan Technological University is doing and your laboratory, which is at the forefront of several intriguing and practical uses of biotech to solve many of the issues facing Michiganders in our Great Lakes. And do I have it right that the name of your laboratory is the Great Lakes Research Center?
That's one of the broader research centers on campus. That's an interdisciplinary center that I am one of the associate directors of.
Well, we like interdisciplinary, here in Congress, because we always push interagency activities, and we are glad to see that you are continuing to put Michigan Tech on the cutting edge of practical biotech solutions. So I've got a couple of questions. One is I'm the co-chair of both the Manufacturing Caucus and the Recycling Caucus, and I understand the role that plastics play in our domestic supply chain. I think all of us see that we've got durability and low cost and plastic injection molding, particularly throughout our automotive sector. But we also recognize that there are some real challenges that we face with not just plastic waste solution, but the breakdown of the particles that are going into our air. We're dealing with nanoplastics in addition to microplastics. And I'm not one of these ones to demonize an industry, but we're constantly looking for for new and better ways to live to our full health. So can you speak to any work that you've been doing in biotech to work on this?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we've done has been focused on how do we take plastics and turn them into valuable products to try to incentivize reusing them and develop novel solutions for recycling plastics. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of other work that's going on, and we're beginning to contribute to that work on how do we find replacements of plastics, such as bioplastics that are produced by a number of organisms. And biotechnology allows us to take a lot of different waste streams and then use that to create these bioplastics that then could serve as a replacement or in addition to many of the current conventional plastics that we use.
And just by way of personal privilege and edification, a lot of times people get possessed by just the single-use plastics. We've seen this with straws or bottles. I mean, plastics in our clothes. It's on the furniture we sit on. It is, surrounding our entire built environment. And so extreme language around banning of plastic or taxing resin is actually, similar to what we're dealing with these erratic shoot by the hip, change by the minute tariffs coming down from this administration, where the consumers just can't continue to bear such extreme costs. But what we can look at are, new biotech solutions to advance and grow our available composites that keep costs low. And then, of course, on critical minerals, which I just love what you're working on, and really am eager to use my perch here in the Congress to lift up and continue to pass legislations that allow us to lessen our dependence on the Chinese Communist Party with regards to critical rare earth minerals. And I was on the select committees for China competitiveness. I was on our working group on critical minerals last term. But I'd love to give you just another minute or so to share what you've been working on in this space. You touched on it in your hearing, but this is of note and fascination for us here.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we're doing now is trying to take waste from mines, mine tailings that still have residual minerals in them, and then use biology as a way of extracting those minerals in a way that really requires very little energy or chemical inputs. And then what you're left with is solutions that contain these minerals that have been leached out of ores that are really of no commercial need. We also have other projects where we're working on plants as a tool for mining, where you can plant a field of plants that will then extract those minerals from low-grade soils or even ores as a way of recovering minerals. And again, it's a process that's not far from being commercialized, but it's an exciting way of recovering these necessary elements using the incredible abilities that biology has to either leach minerals or naturally extract them from the
Okay, I'm applying for an apprenticeship. I mean, that's just remarkable. And I assume you're using or accessing mines that are located by campus, is that right?
Yeah, so for one of our projects, it's a number of the mines that are no longer functional that are near campus, and another one we're also working with local mines in the UP that are giving us some of their tailings to test some of these technologies.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, thank you so much, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the gentlewoman from South Carolina. Ms. Biggs, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing, and I would like to thank each of the witnesses for offering their testimony today. So biotechnology will be a foundational area of science in the 21st century and beyond. It has the potential to revolutionize healthcare, farming, genetics, and much more. However, as Dr. Endy noted in his testimony, the CCP has made biotechnology a priority area of research for 2 decades. So I would like to offer my question to you, Dr. Endy. Since 2012, Xi Jinping has made biotechnology a frontier field integral to China's military-civil fusion strategy. Can you describe how civilian biotech advances, especially in genomics, gene editing, and synthetic biology, flow directly into the People's Liberation Army research?
Thank you for your question. I'd frame how China approaches biotechnology not only as military-civil fusion, but all of nation, which is even more powerful. What that looks like is full-on investment and support for education, for research, for entrepreneurship, and for translation to full-scale manufacturing. So when you think about military capabilities are dependent upon the broader capabilities of a nation. Where do the people come to staff the factories? You know, what capabilities do you have on shore? And so on. And so you can't tease apart a nation's biocapacity, if you will, from biosecurity and military. As biology becomes a general purpose technology, anything we learn to encode in DNA can be grown. So it's not just medicines, foods, and fuels, it's other stuff. Like what? Energetics, right? Electrical components, electronics, coatings. It's hard to overstate how many possibilities arrive when you can use biology to organize atoms with atomic precision. There's a whole category of material science that hasn't even been tapped into yet. So there's both concerns that I think manifest in the current moment, and then when you look forward in terms of innovation, a whole host of technical ambiguities that will create strategic surprise or risk.
Thank you. And to kind of piggyback on that, what civilian firms and research institutes serve as primary conduits, and what risk do they pose to U.S. national security?
I'd be hesitant to talk specifically, but I'll give you an example of something that I've observed recently that's more in the open. So it's not just explicit capabilities and power we're talking about here. It's also coordination power and soft power. The iGEM competition I helped start 20 years ago relies on an open source kit of DNA parts. Our ability to manufacture those parts in the United States has dropped off due to challenges in funding and the state of the private sector. This year, for the first time, the manufacturing of those parts took place in Shenzhen. So the global distribution of open source DNA content, GitHub, if you will, for DNA code, designed all over the world, starting in America, and it's made in Shenzhen, and simply because we don't have the capacity to resource it right now.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll go next to the ranking member from North Carolina, Congresswoman Ross. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Obernolte. As I said before, I represent part of the Research Triangle, and we are already seeing the effects of the Trump administration withholding money that was appropriated by Congress for the sciences and for biotechnology. As a matter of fact, there have been a series of lawsuits to get that appropriated money restored. When I had the roundtable that I talked about, people talked about clinical trials, experiments that are just being abandoned. Graduate students who cannot finish their course of study and may be moving back to their home countries. I've also, in my district, had scientists protesting, literally protests. My favorite sign, we talked a little bit about signs here, was "It's so bad, introverts are protesting." And the scientists have come with, people from their labs. So we can talk about the future, but I really would like to talk about how we capture that money that has not yet gone into the projects that have counted on it, that has kept private investment from further investing in some of those positive projects, and retaining that talent. And so, Dr. Lee, I'd like to address that first to you and then to Ms. Gracio.
Well, thank you for that question. And I think one of the challenges that scientists have, if I generalize, is we don't spend enough time thinking about how we can best communicate with the public about what we do and why it's important. And I think that is part of the root cause of the issue, and I think the more we can inform and engage with the public at large, I think the better the chances that there's a broader understanding of the importance of some of these efforts and these agencies. If I just take NIST as an example, which is within the committee's jurisdiction, NIST, countless aspects of society depend on NIST because they depend on accurate measurements of something. Whether you're buying a gallon of gas or a bag of potato chips or getting your cholesterol measured or buying a smoke alarm to make sure it goes off at the right time and not when it's not, or keeping the time, right? Which also is used in GPS and cell phone technology and so on. NIST is the agency that's behind all of that. You don't see the NIST logo on the gas pump, but they are the agency that underpins that, and they give confidence to businesses that businesses can function, and they give confidence indirectly to consumers that consumers can rely on the products or get that gallon of gas instead of a half gallon of gas when you fill your tank. So I think what happens if you see reductions in an agency like NIST? Well, then it starts to eat away at our ability to function as society. You have companies that might lose confidence in doing business in the U.S. You might have consumers that would lose confidence in the goods and services they're trying to get from those companies, and our technological underpinnings of society, keeping the time, for example, and our cyber infrastructure, they start to become weakened. And I think it's really important that we continue to make those investments. We want to not only have that infrastructure, we also want to drive some of the global standards in this space so that the standards that are established internationally favor an open society and not just products from a particular nation.
Okay, Ms. Gracio.
Thank you for the question. So I'm going to maintain my answer focused on the Department of Energy National Laboratories. The federal government really plays a crucial role in supporting the role of innovation. The high-risk, high-reward research is done in the national labs based upon infrastructure that lays the groundwork for innovation within private industry. The national labs take on the early stage activities, high risk that breaks down the barriers to innovation, setting the stage for private companies to translate fundamental scientific discoveries, basic research, as you were talking about earlier, into new technologies. DOE supports those user facilities, those high-performance computing capabilities and resources to provide unique, large-scale access to infrastructure that may not be provided or accessible by private industry. That public-private partnership is critical, and the sustainment of investments to the basic research is a critical component to innovating for biotechnology of the future. Without the public-private partnership, and I want to comment on Dr. Lee's perspective in terms of communication, it is a critical aspect that we get the information out so that private industry can leverage what's being done in the national labs and they understand the basic sciences. And at the same time, we have to understand what the consequences are of the potential capabilities that are being developed so we understand how to create countermeasures for different activities that could be used in an adversarial way.
Thank you, and we also need to communicate that to the administration. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll go next to the representative from Colorado, Mr. Hurd. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you to our chairs and ranking members for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing and ask a few questions. Dr. Techman, I found your work on distributed biomanufacturing from food to fuel fascinating. Can you talk about the primary barriers to commercializing these technologies at scale, particularly in austere or disaster-struck environments?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think there's a lot of advances that have happened in distributed biomanufacturing that makes this possible. I think part of what some of the challenges are how we move from the very sterile lab environment that you might have, say, in a manufacturing facility to a field-forward or austere environment. So part of that is how do we make sure the biology is robust, and how do we create systems such as the bioreactors and other tools that can handle operating under that low power, low resource environments. And so I think there's a lot of advances, and we're very close to being able to do that. But part of that is both better engineering the biology to be robust, and then making sure that we have the engineered systems to be able to operate in an autonomous manner.
Great, thank you. Dr. Endy, one of the institutions of higher learning that I'm particularly proud of in my home state is the Colorado School of Mines, and I understand that at the school, researchers are looking at the potential for DNA to serve as a long-term data storage medium by synthesizing nucleobases and base pairs. Can you talk about the pros and cons of DNA for data storage and any of the technological hurdles that stand in the way of its adoption?
Thank you for the question. The idea that you could use DNA to store data sounded strange to me at first. I kind of kept it in that corner until the university librarian came over one day. Super excited about it. We want to put the library into DNA. And I said, you're crazy. It costs $10,000 a megabyte and takes a month to code digital data into DNA by synthesizing DNA. And he said, you don't have any idea about the library, do you? And I said, I admitted I hadn't been to the library, and it's all online. And he said, we have to keep books around. And we struggle to move our archives into digital formats because we have no confidence that the digital formats will be readable in the future. And so when we look out 1 decade, 2 decades, 5 decades, right, the only thing we have confidence in being able to read out in digital format is DNA. It solves our long-term strategy for storing data. Mind-blowing to me. So last year, one of the things we did, as an example, was we took the telegraph that President Hoover sent back to Stanford to create the Hoover Archive, and we digitized it, and we worked with a company called Twist to synthesize DNA to, I didn't know you were going to ask me this question, to synthesize DNA encoding the digital copy of the telegraph that President Hoover sent. And it's right here. And we were one of the first customers, if you will, of this new nascent commercial service. It's just getting going. It's not ready off the shelf to go to market. It probably would require about $250 million of investment in R&D to make this a reliable data storage service, and the DNA Data Storage Alliance is the industry group working to make that happen. One of the most exciting things I know about in the federal government is the Library of Congress is experimenting with this, and I hope that next year, on the anniversary of 1776, they'll have some of the nation's digital treasures encoded in DNA in the library for all of us to take a look at.
And this DNA storage technology medium would last for thousands of years, conceivably?
Yes. The way it works is just, DNA is not alive in this case, just a polymer, it's just a tape. You put it in the dark and it's dry and it's stable for about 1,000 years in this format.
And what's the reason for, so you have the adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, I'm going back to biology, there's some synthetic ones as well. What is the purpose of those in the DNA?
Yeah, most natural and bioengineered living systems are encoded with 4 bases, but there's been incredible work in chemistry to expand the genetic code to 6 or 8 bases. Many different reasons to think about doing that. One of them is it gives you a bigger alphabet for making more interesting proteins. If you have more options at the DNA level, you can encode more options at the protein level. Just gets us access to more and more chemistry.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the ranking member of the full committee, my colleague from California. Ms. Lofgren, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Trump proposed an NSF budget of roughly $3.9 billion for fiscal year 2026, which is a $5.1 billion and change cut relative to 2024 levels. A 55% cut is what's being proposed. This was a very large reduction to funding for research, education, and infrastructure related to biotechnology. It includes over $100 million in cuts for cross-agency biotechnology activities relative to the 2024 funding levels. Dr. Endy, as you know, the funding levels proposed by the administration does not match the Commission's recommendation of $15 billion over the next 5 years to foster biotechnology. What are we going to lose if this funding is not realized? Can we actually create the U.S. bioeconomy based on these cuts? And I'm mindful of Chairman Babin's admonition at the start of this, that the budget is a proposal, it's not what's in place. But if you could give us some insight on that, I think it would help us.
Thank you for your question. The Commission's report and what it calls for presumes that the budget's flat, that we're not cutting the budget. So I just want to note that. And when I read this report and saw the initial number that they were putting forward of 15, that was too low, in my opinion. As good as this is, I don't think what's recommended here is resourced enough to get the job done. So, it depends on what our goal is. If our goal is to compete and win, I think we heard from Dr. Lee, we've got to resource the whole team. And it would take much too long to detail all the things we're at risk of losing. But I appreciate that we have to explain to everybody why this is important and critically important. It's not easy to do that. I'm not here as a scientist telling you this. I'm here as an American who grew up near Valley Forge telling you this. We got to figure this out. And, otherwise, I don't like our chances.
Right. I do think the making people understand what's happening is important in order to get the public attention and imagination. I was interested in Chairman Obernoti's comment about the state of computing in 1975, and it reminded me, as an undergraduate at Stanford before 1975 in the 70s, I was, I had a scholarship for tuition, but I had to do work for room and board and books, and I was doing essentially clerical tasks over in the communications department, and we were sending things to UCLA, and I realized it wasn't a fax, actually it was the internet, but I didn't know what it was. And so I think if we had articulated that in a more thoughtful way earlier, we would have made quicker progress than we did, and we would have benefited from that. I'm wondering your thoughts on how we might, when I went to the lab, it blew my mind. It was wonderful, and Mr. Chairman, I hope we can all go because it is a fabulous experience. But how do we explain that to the public, because we have an opportunity here that is really beyond belief, and yet no one knows about it?
What's going to make the bioeconomy American? Is it only that the jobs and money and the factories will be in the 50 states? Or is it more than that? Is it about the terms and conditions, the culture that surrounds biotechnology? An American bioeconomy, in other words, should not only be about life, medicine, food, fuel, it should also be about liberty and the pursuit of happiness. All right? Now, what does that mean? It means that everybody, it's not that we're explaining science. You don't want to do science-splaining, right? We want to give people the option of learning about biology, of accessing biotechnology. My favorite idea in this regard is a recent proposal called libraries. If you take the word library and you change the first letter I to the letter A, you get a new word called a library. And you get to invent a new profession, the librarian. I hope there's a librarian of Congress someday. But imagine what the Carnegie Foundation did over a century ago, seeing thousands of public libraries all over the country coming forward to help everybody gain access to knowledge and the benefits of knowledge. Let's rerun that type of playbook, but for science, starting with biology.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there is so much hope here that we need to be able to communicate to the American public. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll go next to the representative from Indiana, Mr. Baird. And on the topic of birthdays, Mr. Baird just celebrated his 80th yesterday. Congratulations. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
You've talked too much, Mr. Chairman, but thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to, I always appreciate the things that we learn in the Science Committee, and having witnesses like you share with us your perspective, because I think there's some really interesting times occurring, and Representative Obernolte really knows well the impact of AI and that kind of technology is going to have on our nation and our industries. But the question I have, I'm going to start, Dr. Lee, deals with the fact that this one big beautiful bill that we've been talking about, and we recently passed, it does include R&D tax credits. And that seeks to restore the ability of businesses to immediately deduct 100% of their domestic R&D expenses. And this provides incentives and supports expansion of new production factories and growing operations in America. So can you speak to how this tax credit will benefit America's leadership in biotechnology?
Thank you for the question, and happy birthday. I actually think R&D tax credits are a really great opportunity to pursue in terms of thinking about where these technology-based industries, whether it's biotech or other advanced technologies, frankly, that are important to the future of our country. I think programs that create avenues where the private sector is incentivized or has incentives to continue to invest here in America, whether it's research or whether it's building that next manufacturing facility or that specialized demonstration facility. I think it's a really important tool that has to be a part of the toolkit that's going to ultimately help us ensure that we maintain and secure our leadership in this space.
Thank you. And then my next question goes to Dr. Endy and you as well, Dr. Lee. But, you know, Dr. Endy, I really appreciated your comment about the leaf being the original solar panel and it's biodegradable. So it's really hard sometimes to improve on nature, in my opinion. But it's great to have the research capability that we do have. So beyond patent and citation counts, what leading indicators should Congress monitor to gauge whether the U.S. is pulling ahead or falling behind in the China biotechnology field?
Thank you for your question. I view competition in biotechnology, again, as a layer cake. We're thinking about people, teaching and education. We're thinking about entrepreneurship and translation powered by research, and then getting things to actually work in the economy. So if I were wanting to pay careful attention to how the race is going, I'd want to instrument all 4 layers in that layer cake, measure what's going on. When's the last time an American iGEM team won the competition? Over a decade ago, William and Mary. How many teams are competing? And so on. So there are different ways of measuring the education layer. And then beyond patents and so on, how many companies do we have in emerging biotechnology that are profitable? That's a good metric. The region or nation that gets to profitability in an area of emerging technology has an unbelievable advantage because the nerds who are doing the work have access to a different stream of money. It's always hard to explain when you're doing something on a frontier and justify why you should be doing the new thing. But if you have that positive economic flywheel, and you have a qualitative advantage. And that's one thing I'm hypersensitive to. If we lose getting to that first in emerging biotech and synthetic biology, it's really a problem. So again, education, research, translation, things working in the economy, I'd want to instrument those 4 layers.
Dr. Lee.
Yeah, well, certainly agree with Dr. Endy on his remarks. I would kind of expand on it and share the way I think about it is kind of early in the value chain and later in the value chain, because it's a really hard question. I think it's a really important question because you want to know that whatever investments, whatever changes in policy you're making are going to have the intended effect. Early in the value chain, I think about discovery. I think about creating that pipeline. And so maybe some of those measures of publications, patents, et cetera, come into play. But there are kind of later phases of that value chain. You might see the creation and construction of manufacturing facilities in the U.S. You'll see manufacturing jobs being created as those early discoveries turn into products. But those are lagging indicators. And then ultimately, you might find sort of measures of our international influence and leadership in the biotech space, which is probably lagging even further, but I think ultimately an important part of what we should be considering.
So my time's up, and I apologize to the other 2 witnesses. I'd love to have heard your answer, but I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the representative from Oregon, Ms. Salinas. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our ranking members and to our witnesses for being here today. Oregon has a strong and growing bioscience industry encompassing over 20,000 workers and almost 2,000 firms in Oregon. And one of these exciting companies in this space is Twist Bioscience, which is pushing the envelope to accelerate and scale up production of synthetic nucleic acids for use in all kinds of exciting research. And I was pleased to work with Congressman McCormick just a few weeks ago to advance the Nucleic Acid Screening for Biosecurity Act, which would direct NIST to improve risk management strategies for these types of tools. The NCSEB report included a few recommendations around biosecurity. I'd like to just expand on this. In your opinions, what are the most important areas for Congress to focus on to make sure that we can minimize risks while maintaining open research and international collaboration? To any of the panelists.
So there's some very important components in terms of sustaining the biosecurity ecosystem we have, understanding the vast amount of data and being able to access that data so that the scientists and the researchers and the commercial industry can make use of that data. But how do we protect that data? We have to put protections around the data. We have to create the security mechanisms so that we have the research security that is needed, whether it's in the lab, whether it's in the commercial industry. We have to protect from espionage. We have to protect from IP. We have IP protections on all of those that we have to accomplish as well. But innovation is critical. And when we share our information, we gain a lot more than we're going to lose. And so we have to think about the mechanisms in which we can share that data in an effective way with trusted partners. And we have to think about how that information can then translate to the manufacturing industry so they can take the information, for example, that the company you're talking about can translate that into technologies, that capability into the technologies and manufacture them to enhance the bioeconomy.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to respond? Yes, Dr. Endy.
You know, the DNA in this vial was built by Twist. I don't know if it was in their Oregon factory, but maybe. Just to complement and add, if we don't have world-leading capabilities, good luck securing them. Right. Right now, we're blessed to have a company like Twist as a national strategic asset, you know, making a go of it. But the most recent research papers I read on DNA synthesis are coming out of Shanghai, promising 10,000-fold improvements in our ability to build DNA. So we could have the best recommendations for screening DNA for biosecurity, but if all of our competitors are using offshore DNA synthesis capabilities, doesn't matter. So just remember, if we want to secure something, we have to be the world leader in it. And is baffling to me. We've seen this playbook over and over again. You know, where's our strategic DNA program, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Lee?
I'll just quickly say, you know, I think there's interesting aspects in the report about the balance between promoting biotech and then protecting biotech. And I think your question gets a bit to that. I think there's a lot of value in having open standards and having U.S. leadership in the field because we can help establish with our partners around the world what those standards and norms are for sharing. But as we as a community of scientists share and create basic knowledge, that works most effectively when others are also sharing basic knowledge and information, because then we can all benefit and we can all develop our own unique capabilities and products and applications from there. So by being in a leadership position on the promoting side of things, we also help set the standards and the norms around the protect side and ensuring that any sharing is symmetric in nature.
Thank you. All right, I recently toured an innovative company in my district called Canopy. It brings new technologies into play to pursue autonomous agriculture. They did everything from propagation to harvest with autonomous machines. Work like this, along with innovative food solutions like lab-grown meat, can offer all kinds of potential benefits to complement traditional agriculture and help ensure a reliable and secure food supply chain for Americans at home and our service members who are stationed abroad. Oftentimes, these enterprises struggle, though, to make the leap from lab to market. That concerns me, particularly given the substantial successes that we've seen of China's top-down approach. How can we best deploy public-private partnerships in ways that leverage our country's existing strengths to improve our ability toward the effective scaling of biotech and biomanufacturing?
One of the things that the U.S. government's done a good job on is promoting pilot-scale biomanufacturing. And there's more to do there, but it's good that we're going. Pilot scale means you're taking something out of a lab and learning to make it at this intermediate scale, but you got to get to full scale to serve the market. And for every dollar we invest in pilot scale, you might imagine 20 more dollars are going to be needed to make the factory to do full scale. Now, where's all that money going to come from? If we're doing $1 billion a year into pilot scale, that means we got to follow with 20, right? I don't want to come here asking for that. Where I'd like to see is private sector being encouraged to accelerate deployment of capital responsibly using their expertise to help make this happen. The neatest example I've got for you to look into would be a company called MycoWorks that's operating in South Carolina. They just opened up a $100 million factory that takes in sawdust and feeds it to mushrooms to make leather-like material, right? And I asked the CEO, how'd you get $100 million to build a factory with the cost of capital the way it is? And one of the things they were able to explore was tax-free bonds at a state level, right? that allows the private sector to complement the public funds to get more factories built more quickly. So if I look out 15 years, let's imagine, the United States build 1,000 $100 million factories for the bioeconomy. That sounds order of magnitude, right? And the way to get that capital moving is going to be these creative public-private, solutions, if you will.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields back. We will hear next from the representative from Utah. Mr. Kennedy, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Obernolte, and thank you to the witnesses. Appreciate you being here. It does seem like a long time when you have to sit here for 2 hours listening to us ask you questions, but you're doing a great job. Biotech plays a vital role in Utah's economic growth as well as public health innovation and scientific advancement. With a rapidly expanding life sciences sector, Utah benefits from world-class research institutions, a skilled workforce, and a business-friendly environment that fosters cutting-edge developments in pharmaceuticals, diagnostics, and medical devices. Utah ranks third among all states for life sciences employment concentration. In my district, Halia Therapeutics, a clinical stage biotechnology company, is advancing drug candidates for Alzheimer's disease, myelodysplastic syndrome, and obesity. Halia is also working to crack inflammatory disorders. Utah's all-in support for the industry is also attracting companies like Nusano, whose products will make Utah the epicenter for radioisotope technology used in cancer treatment. And Denali Therapeutics recently completed construction of a 60,000 square foot manufacturing facility in Salt Lake City, the first biotech operation of its kind in the state that is developing therapies for neurodegenerative disease and Hunter syndrome. Utah is at the forefront of U.S. biotech advances, and we need the federal government to serve as partners in fostering continued innovation. So with that, I also want to make an ancillary note that gain-of-function research for COVID is one of those biotech things we have to be thoughtful of, and I'm sure your industries are thoughtful about how do we protect ourselves when there are sinister ways to use biotechnology, and you've been outstanding in your advocacy for this. I'll start first with Dr. Lee and a question. What are the key regulatory barriers the federal government is putting in your way that we need to break down so that United States biotech sector has an advantage when we compete with adversaries like Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's great to also hear the examples you're sharing. I'm familiar with some of them as well about all the great work happening in Utah. I think as the NSCEB report highlights, it's a complicated regulatory landscape. I mean, the examples you gave, a lot of them are in the kind of medical countermeasures, medicine space. It's a very complicated set of regulations in that space as we think about applications in environment and other areas. There's other regulations that come into play. And I think one of the challenges that companies, particularly smaller companies that are trying to grow, they might have a really promising technology, and they may not have enough understanding and awareness of how to traverse what can be a pretty complicated regulatory environment. I think there are opportunities to figure out how can we focus on helping those smaller companies with very innovative technologies grow and be nurtured and supported as they have to try to bring their products and processes and services to market. I think there's opportunities there. I'll highlight that one of the recommendations in the NSCEB report that I don't think we've touched on very much in the discussion so far is the idea of creating a National Biotech Coordinating Office, an office that can kind of span the breadth of government, looking at where there are opportunities to improve, where there's opportunities to create some strategy and synergy, and where there's opportunities to ensure that we're leveraging all of the resources and all the specialties across the government. So I think one way I would think about it is that important activity can be an avenue by which we can start to think about how we can improve and support those businesses that want to grow.
Thank you for bringing that up. And we want to get out of the way so that these industries, particularly the smaller innovative technologies that might be destroyed by regulatory burdens, can be enhanced as to their likelihood to bring important products ultimately to market. Dr. Techman, thank you very much for your focus on the workforce pipeline. And as you know, China is very focused on STEM education. How can we get our students more interested in math and science, especially in the K through 12 level of education?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's really important that we show how incredible biology is to students. I mean, as a high school student, I had the privilege of being able to go and see what it was like in a molecular biology lab, and for me, that was the spark. And so I think it's been brought up before. I think there's so many examples that capture the imagination of what biology can do. And I think that the more that we can give those experiences to students early on in their education, the more that they will then be able to then take that and run with it. I think that's what's going to make us competitive when those high school students are using tools for genetic engineering to be able to make these new functions that are helpful and see the potential for biology. At that point, I think we start to build that pipeline.
Thank you very much. Instead of becoming social media influencers, I might actually come to your position and come to Congress and tell us how great all that stuff is. Well, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the time, and with that, and thank you for the answers to those questions, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll go next to the representative from North Carolina. Ms. Fushi, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chairman and ranking members for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimonies and your willingness to answer our questions. North Carolina's 4th District and the Triangle region of North Carolina is no stranger to biotechnology. Anchored by the Research Triangle and supported by the surrounding higher education institutions, our region is well positioned to fuel innovation and support the current and future bioeconomy workforce. For any of you, can you please describe to what extent the pipeline for biotech workforce talent has been negatively affected by this administration's gutting of scientific research across the federal government and the targeting of international visa holders who work in these disciplines? Anybody want to take a stab?
I will try to offer a perspective that, as we think about workforce in the field that I'm in, I think about a whole range of kinds of skills that are needed. There are those that, and North Carolina is very exceptional in this, those that are doing the manufacturing. Those, to me, are jobs in a manufacturing facility. There's a certain set of skills, a certain set of background and experience needed to do that job effectively. Those are typically very high-wage jobs, and I think we want to be able to support those activities. I think if you look at biotech broadly, you also start to see the research component of this, the earliest stage in the value chain, and I think it's also important that we have that kind of investment, as we've also talked about earlier in the hearing. And those kinds of jobs tend to be, from my observation, located in hubs. And those hubs may be dictated by a geography, they may be dictated by a company or a multinational company, and I think they may be more limited in geographically where they get deployed. But I think the really neat thing about biotechnology and that we've been talking about is that those biomanufacturing jobs, those manufacturing jobs, they can and they should be placed all across the country because there is opportunity all across the country. And I think one way that I think about this is thinking about the importance of the manufacturing piece in addition to thinking about the innovation and the discovery piece.
Sure. Dr. Gracio.
So one of the things that I think is really important to understand about the National Laboratory System is that our scientists work there because they're passionate about the science and about the mission that they work in. And their ability to do that science is underpinned by their educational background and how they come to the laboratory itself. The work that they do is critically important to the bioeconomy. It's critically important to our nation and the missions that we serve, whether it's a national security mission or a science mission or an energy mission. And continuing to fund the research at the laboratories to underpin the basic sciences that can serve the bioeconomy is a critical component of driving the global competition that we are seeking here. So the scientists are here for a key reason, and that's to advance science.
If there are no others on this question, I'll just simply ask the question this way. Should the biotech industry be limiting the scope of who they hire?
The Nobel laureate for DNA synthesis is an immigrant, the late Gobind Khorana. Half of the American Nobel laureates are immigrants, roughly. If you go to Silicon Valley and you ask, who's in the startup executive suite for the successful companies, majority immigrants to the United States. My rough understanding of things. So we've done well when we welcome people who want to do good. Should the biotechnology area, industry be hiring anybody, everybody? No.
That's
right?
not
And
my question.
I know that's not your question.
That's not my question.
Yeah, yeah. So it's important that, in my view, everybody has the option of learning about biology. Everybody has the option of participating in the bioeconomy. That's what's going to make it uniquely American. That's what's going to make it democratic, and we have to keep that going.
Thank you for that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from my colleague from California, Mr. Fong. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to to those who are providing testimony. Certainly, the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology has laid out a sobering but strategic blueprint. We are in a global race, and our competitors are investing heavily, often with fewer constraints and greater speed. I wanted to ask Dr. Lee, and anyone can chime in, but you mentioned supply chain. I wanted to ask, what are the most critical vulnerabilities in the U.S. biotechnology supply chain today, particularly for raw materials, reagents, or biomanufacturing inputs? And how dependent is the United States on foreign suppliers for essential biotech inputs? And what are the national security implications? And what steps has the federal government taken to map and monitor the biotech supply chain from end to end?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very important question, and I can follow up after the hearing with, given the breadth of that question, perhaps some more specifics. But I think we live in as we all know, we live in a global society, and supply chains are global by nature. I think when you look at where materials come from, when you look at where drug substance or APIs are manufactured, it is, for better or worse, it is a global environment. And there are certainly our competitor nations, but there's also our friends that have been able to secure a substantial amount of the manufacturing of these important materials. And I think it's a real risk to the United States. I mean, if you just look in the news today, perhaps outside of the space of biotech, and you look at rare earths and you see what's going on there, I think you can begin to understand the challenges that happen when you become so tightly integrated and you're trying to have difficult conversations with people. So I think there's a significant amount of improvement that we could make in terms of ensuring and securing our own interests. But it is a global society, and we should be working with our friends and allies and partners to ensure that we can meet our needs as well as theirs.
Anyone else have anything to add? Then to follow up, what should the federal government do, whether it's incentives or other policies, to help stabilize or de-risk the biotech supply chain?
Yeah, that's another really good question, and I think a piece of that is really articulated in some of the NSCEB report recommendations. Unfortunately, it's not simple. It's not as simple as saying we need to just do this one thing. I think it's a collection of activities. I think it begins with that National Biotech Coordinating Office to take a strategic look at this, because we're talking about supply chains that are complicated across many different types of products. I think it's ensuring that we have demonstration facilities and scale-up facilities so that small innovative companies that are trying to bring new technologies to market that may be better than current technologies, that they have a place where they can innovate and accelerate their innovation. And ultimately, I think there's probably a piece of this which is creating financial incentives or at least creating an environment where companies would rather choose to build their factories here in the United States as opposed to other places.
And I guess my last question is, one of the lessons learned through the pandemic is certainly this challenge. How well did the biotechnology supply chain perform during the pandemic, and did it reveal any structural weaknesses that we need to address in the short term compared to a kind of a long-term strategy?
Well, I think I think what happened over those years highlighted a lot of weaknesses, and in some cases, I think we were able to get through as a nation in part because we made quite significant financial investments to build infrastructure, to build capacity to meet our needs. And part of the way I think about that is, a modest investment on an ongoing basis can probably save one from having to make massive investments when there's a crisis or some other situation that comes up. So I think there's some lessons learned about ensuring that we have supply chains, that we understand how those supply chains work. I think there's opportunities to think about it not just in terms of factories, but also workers. You can't just build a manufacturing facility to make some complicated medicine or medical countermeasure and expect that all of a sudden you're going to have talent everywhere that you can just start filling that facility with. So I think there's also a workforce piece to this.
Certainly appreciate that. This is certainly a very important. I know that in reviewing the recommendations in the report, the threat from China and the CCP is real. And so if our core materials and chemicals and reagents are from an adversarial country, we have to begin to reevaluate and have a resilient supply chain or supply chains, plural, to allow us to be the global leader that we need to be. So my time has run out. I certainly yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the representative from Delaware, Ms. McBride. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Chairs Weber and Obernolte and Ranking Members Stevens and Ross for holding this timely joint hearing on biotechnology and continuing the important bipartisan work of this committee. As we've already heard, in December 2021, Congress established the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology. This bipartisan independent commission was tasked with evaluating and recommending ways in which the U.S. can support the secure development of biotech and biomanufacturing here in the United States. The commission's recent action plan for American biotechnology highlights the need for more private-led, public-supported innovation in biotechnology and emphasizes the need for dedicated workforce development programs to strengthen the domestic biomanufacturing industry. If you all haven't read this report, anyone watching, it is a page-turner. I definitely recommend opening it up. Today, I am so proud to highlight my home state, the greatest state in the history of the Union, Delaware, because the first state is truly a leader in this space, a successful hub for biotechnology investments and innovation, thanks in large part to my friend and one of today's witnesses, Dr. Kelvin Lee, and his leadership as NIMBL's Institute Director. We're incredibly lucky to have him in Delaware. I've bragged a lot about NIMBL to this committee, and so I'm really glad that everyone gets to hear from him today and got to hear his wonderful sports analogies for today's needs. Last month, Senator Coons and I welcomed commission members to NIMBL to see firsthand how government and industry partnerships drive excellence in innovation and workforce development. NIMBL's success proves we must continue these efforts to secure the future of biotechnology innovation in the United States. And above all, it's critical that we understand that to reshore manufacturing, we must manufacture for the future, not the past. To do this, we must take this bipartisan and independent commission's warnings and recommendations seriously. We must provide full funding for science and research. We must support our researchers, provide students with the resources they need to excel, and welcome common sense partnerships to make sure the U.S. remains the leader in biotechnology innovation, not China. So my first question is to my good friend, Dr. Lee. NIMBL, the University of Delaware, and state-based associations have worked for decades to create a powerful biotechnology sector in the state. And as we look to expand biomanufacturing across the country through public-private partnerships, I'm curious what lessons we can take for national initiatives that we've learned in Delaware, that you've learned in Delaware.
Well, thank you for the question and the kind words. I appreciate that. I think in Delaware, when I reflect on how we got to where we are, it really is, it's not an overnight situation. It's I think, a strategic and a consistent investment that has been made over the last couple of decades with an emphasis placed on life science. How are we going to create an innovation ecosystem in Delaware that is right for Delaware? And what does right for Delaware mean? Well, it's not a large state. It's a relatively small state. And I think through that, it has fostered an environment where organizations have to find a way to collaborate and partner and work together. And I think we've done a very good job in the state of finding, where is it that the public sector can contribute? Where is it that the private sector has something to contribute? How can we bring these different kinds of organizations to come together to forge a future that is going to be the one that we all want to see?
Earlier in one of your answers to a previous question, you talked about workforce development, you talked about education and the range of educational needs for the biomanufacturing industries. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the workforce needs and how they might be different from other emerging technology hubs, and what kind of education you think is most needed to fill gaps, to build the workforce, to grow biomanufacturing here in the United States.
Yeah, well, in terms of the kinds of skills, I think it's really quite broad. It is, on the one hand, as I mentioned earlier, the more specialized, the research type knowledge and skills, and that's not for everybody, but I think we need that. But then I think about the opportunity is really around manufacturing. It's around biomanufacturing. And those are the kinds of jobs that are the kinds of jobs where you need skills, you need training. You don't have to have a long history of getting a PhD or a master's degree. I think you have to be a dedicated worker with skills to be effective in that space. But as you imagine the amount of factories going up across the country, then you start to realize you need other really important kinds of positions filled. You need the trades, because who's going to build these factories and maintain the factories? You need people who are skilled in automation, people who are knowledgeable about data science. So there's a lot of cross-cutting benefits that can emerge. And I think that's true in other emerging industries as well. Biotech and biopharma in particular is a little bit unique because it's so highly regulated, very unique environments to do the manufacturing. But a chip fab is also a very unique environment to do manufacturing, and I think there's lessons learned about how we train people to work at those places.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. We will hear next from a representative from Arkansas. Mr. Bly, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Bly? Oh, sorry, Alaska? Oh, there we go.
AK is Alaska. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kudzu is a fast-growing vine from Asia. It was introduced in the U.S. for erosion control as an ornamental plant. However, kudzu spread rapidly, smothering native vegetation, trees, and even structures. Today, kudzu is known as the vine that ate the South. Kudzu now covers millions of acres and costs millions annually to manage. It serves as a reminder that often there are unintended consequences of well-intentioned interventions in nature. So my first question goes to Dr. Techman. I'm encouraged to hear about opportunities using biotechnology for soil cleanup and mining, but what we're discussing is, by any measure and by definition, a change of function, whether gain or deletion of function. How do you ensure that we can switch off or contain innovation should unintended consequences be identified after they have been deployed in the natural environment?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, and I think it's a really important one. My background has been in bioremediation, where we're trying to clean up contaminants. And as we thought about kind of how do we intervene in the situation where you have a contaminated system and use biology to help with that, there are some ways of taking what's naturally there and finding ways of encouraging it, such that you're not necessarily introducing something foreign into that system to deal with the problem. And part of this is our ability to know what exists in nature, what's naturally there, and then how can we encourage the natural community to do that. So for example, in the biomining project that we have, we're not introducing organisms as much as we are finding ways of encouraging what's there to do what we want it to do. And so I think that's part of that balance there, but yet it is something that we have to think critically about from the very beginning. I think it's essential that we think about what are the long-term potential unintended consequences of this technology, and really ask those hard questions at the beginning before we get to the point of deploying it in the environment. So I think it's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks. My next question to Dr. Lee. Now, depending on what one believes about the origins of COVID-19, the gain-of-function biotechnology research of the Wuhan lab had an extraordinarily deleterious impact on the global population. How do we best contain risk from nations with little to no safety controls?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think one of the areas that I believe we can all improve, and perhaps this is an important piece of this, is it's going to sound a little bit silly in a sense, workforce training. I think in the research space that we live in doing biotech, for the first few decades, people didn't think about the need to protect, right? People thought about this as a great research field, it's producing new medicines, it's producing new products. And I think within the research community, we haven't had enough people thinking about dual use function, thinking about what the risks are. And I start to now see more people talking about it, but I don't know that enough people are talking about how do we vet people who are working in these fields? How do we vet projects? How do we understand and talk about what some of those risks are? And if there are risks, how do we mitigate those risks? We want the promote piece. We want the open science to lead to new products and deliver the benefits to all of us for that. But certainly want to acknowledge that I think we need to talk more about what are the risks and how do we identify and deal with those risks.
Do you think it would make sense for us to pursue an international framework or treaty agreement that would help us to ensure that there are proper safeguards for this technology?
I am a little bit out of my expertise, but I actually think there are some in certain areas that exist. Whether they're effective or not is perhaps an open question, and whether everyone is, everyone meaning all nations, are adequately aligned with those policies, guidelines, and treaties is also something I'm not very familiar with. But I do think that the ability to establish and set global standards and norms of how work is done is critically important. And to be a leader in the field and be perceived as a leader, as a nation, allows you to drive others towards converging on those standards and those norms. If you're not a leader in the field and you aspire to be one and somebody else is, then in a sense you're trying to play catch up and influence in a way that is far less effective.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We will go next to the representative from New York. I do know what NY stands for. Mr. Riley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lee, I loved in your opening statement, it was the sports analogy. So I'm going to ask you all, the last SST hearing we had, I asked a similar question. Nobody knew the answer to it. It's a related question. Does anybody know who won the national championship for men's lacrosse over Memorial Day weekend? Okay, this is what happened last time when I asked who won the ECAC hockey championship. So the answer is Cornell, which I represent, and to honor Cornell's lacrosse team, which is clearly what we're going to establish in this hearing, is that we are at Cornell an athletic powerhouse in the country. We won ECAC hockey. We just won the national championship for lacrosse. So I'm going to leave this here to honor the Big Red because, you know, we beat everybody else. So I also raised Cornell, Dr. Lee, for obvious reasons. We're at the forefront of biotechnology. I'm so proud of the work that's happening at the Cornell Institute of Biotechnology. They're doing, just as you know, amazing work with both human and animal health, which is really important for our ag economy. And it's a place where we are taking incredible technologies and innovations, not just to incubate those, but to also commercialize those. You talked quite a bit earlier about the challenges of taking things from the labs and the process to the factory floor. And you said we invent stuff here, which is great, but we've got to start making stuff here in America too. That's the other piece of this. So I was hoping you might be able to use some of your time from your own experience at Cornell's Institute of Biotechnology to maybe talk about some of the really important work that they're doing, particularly as it relates to our ag economy. And as you're doing that, you know, we're all cognizant of some of the budget cuts that are being proposed. And maybe if you have a perspective on how those cuts could impact and hinder some of the really important work that's happening, I would love to hear that perspective. If you also want to talk about how great Cornell athletics is, I'll give you the time for that too.
Well, certainly as national champions, they obviously have great teams, so absolutely. Thank you for that question. You know, Cornell is a wonderful institution. It's a great institution. It has an incredible richness in its students, an incredible richness in its faculty, And they are effective, right? As an institution of higher education, they know how to get things done, and they certainly have delivered impact. I know that the Institute of Biotechnology there does a really amazing job at bringing together life science researchers, faculty, students, and staff to tackle some of the most interesting and promising and challenging problems of the day, certainly in the ag biotech space, as well as in other areas. What I'll highlight maybe in response to your question is, one of the things that really makes life science work these days, and it's not just at Cornell, I think it's true broadly, is that technology is fundamentally driving how life science works. And we talk a little bit about AI as a piece of that, but even the commoditization and the availability of technology for DNA synthesizers, as we talked earlier, DNA sequencers, and so on, there is a lot of infrastructure that drives our ability to make those discoveries and ultimately create those products. And Cornell and that Institute of Biotechnology has done a wonderful job of creating an infrastructure that the Cornell faculty and small companies and large companies can access and benefit from. And there is an incredible efficiency in saying, we're going to create a place where you don't have to buy all that equipment that's very expensive and figure out how to maintain it and yourself, because then you put it out of reach from a lot of different perspectives, to let's try to centralize some of these services that are unique and important. And by doing that, we can become the best in the world in some of these services, and we can make sure that we can deliver. And that, frankly, creates also a financial efficiency, because then not everybody has to have that for themselves. They can rely on a set of experts and a set of expert tools and capabilities that allows them to do their work.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, because I think I think all of us here, most of us, at least I agree, we need to make the government more efficient. If there's places where there's waste or fraud or abuse, we need to get rid of it. But these investments that we're talking about are actually some of the most efficient ways we can spend money. If we're investing in that sort of infrastructure, creating those economies of scale, if we stop doing that, we're not only going to undercut the science, but we're going to waste a whole lot of money. So I really appreciate that perspective. Just really quickly, you talked about the loss of manufacturing jobs. That's something that's near and dear to my heart in our district, where we used to have IBM, and I lost a lot of jobs. My time's expiring, but I'll submit a question to the record for you about you wrote in your testimony about us losing out to countries with more effective industrial policy. I think one of the things that we don't think about enough is the CHIPS and Science Act as industrial policy, with the science provision is industrial policy. The investments in the National Science Foundation, that's industrial policy. That's not just science, that's manufacturing jobs. My time's expired, but I'll come back to you with some of that. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We will go next to the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Babin. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Endy, if you don't mind, in your testimony, you suggested that foundational discoveries are the key to U.S. leadership in biotech. What gaps do you see in our fundamental knowledge of biology, and what unique roles do both the public and private sectors have in filling those gaps?
Thank you for the question.
Yes, sir.
One thing to highlight is cells, the fundamental unit of life. These things we partner with to do useful stuff. Turns out there's no cell on Earth that we fully understand. They're still mysterious at their microscopic level. This is best illustrated by work to build genomes, and it only include things that are required for the cell to work. And when we do that, there's about 20% of the parts that are required for the cell to work, and nobody on Earth knows what they do. These are called the essential genes of unknown function. And the consequence of that is bioengineering workflows remain Edisonian. Tinker and test, tinker and test. I don't know if my thing's going to work until I build it and test it. That's very different than aircraft engineering today. And so how are we going to punch through this ambiguity and get to a complete operational understanding of the fundamental unit of life? This is not something I could go raise money for to start a company to do. This is something that's going to have to come from the public treasure. The return is this significant upgrade in our ability to partner with biology to solve problems. There's other examples, but just start with that. How do we get to a complete understanding of the fundamental unit of life, the cell. And the people who can get that job done are supported by NSF, the Department of Energy, and NIST. We need better measurement tools, we need better professional teams sustaining the work, and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ms. Gracio, earlier this week, the DOJ indicted 2 Chinese researchers who attempted to smuggle a dangerous fungus, a biological pathogen, into the United States. One of the scientists worked at the University of Michigan. The other worked for a Chinese university, and both allegedly had connections to the Chinese Communist Party. Do the national labs have the necessary expertise to address emerging biotech threats resulting from unmonitored laboratory experiments or accidental or intentional release of pathogens?
Thank you for the question. The national labs have necessary expertise, the instrumentation, the capabilities to address these kinds of threats, to understand and to explore them. Today, we've responded to the Amerithrax attacks in 2001 and to multiple naturally occurring outbreaks of Ebola in Africa. So the mass spectrometry, the instrumentation, the vast array of instruments, and the ability to bring all of that data together and analyze it so that we can understand what these threats are is a core capability of the Department of Energy.
Is the U.S. vulnerable to agro-terrorism as alleged from China, as alleged by the FBI, I should say? And what can the United States do to mitigate that risk if it really exists?
Absolutely. The U.S. is unfortunately very vulnerable to agricultural threats, including agroterrorism, as what you're referring to here, and naturally occurring outbreaks such as food and mouth disease in multiple European countries, and the widespread outbreak of African swine fever. We continue to vigilantly monitor imports, including inadvertent and deliberate violations, and to put our agriculture, these activities put our agriculture at risk. And the monitoring, whether it's through the Custom and Border Protection, through the ports and borders, is a critical component, but also ensuring we understand what's going on in foreign countries that could come into the U.S. is a critical element of this as well. So increasing the ability to collect information and understand the vast array of capabilities of foreign countries is an important aspect.
Okay, thank you. And really quickly, Dr. Lee, NIMBLE plays an important role in developing technologies and necessary workforce for innovation in biopharmaceutical manufacturing and de-risking new techniques. Could you elaborate very quickly on some products or technologies like the buffer stock blending system that were developed at NIMBLE and how they impacted the industry?
Yeah, so very briefly, the technology referred to, the buffer stock blending skid, is really trying to automate high school chemistry to solve a problem that the industry stakeholders that we work with came together and said, we're managing very complicated supply chains. We have proprietary relationships with vendors. We build these factories that are very big and very expensive with very large clean rooms. And they realized, even though they all had proprietary relationships and situations, they all pretty much were purchasing the same stuff. And so by creating a more efficient supply chain and building basically one piece of equipment that all companies could use if they chose to use it, they actually streamlined supply chains. They reduced the capital investment needed to build that next factory. They reduced the operating costs, and they can do it far faster and more effectively and at higher quality than they could using traditional approaches.
Okay, thank you. I'm out of time, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. McLean Delaney. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you to our chair, and thank you to all of our panelists here. I really have been listening in from my office, and I was so happy to hear this panel really discuss the importance of research agencies, and all of you that work together, and how their impact really helps innovation, our national security, and really companies thrive in my district, in biopharma and elsewhere. So Maryland is a national hub for biotechnology research and development across a number of sectors. And Mr. Lee, I was hearing here kind of a little bit of a love fest with NIST, that's in my district, and I obviously love NIST. As I was reviewing the National Security Commission's report on emerging biotechnology, I was glad to see recommendations highlighting the importance of standards and frameworks to protect American biological data. This is really to all of you, but the U.S. doesn't have universal standards for making sure that biological data is really ready for AI application. And since biological data is key to advancing AI and biotechnology, how can NIST, which I think is really one of our nation's jewel, with a deep standards-setting expertise, lead in standards development for biological data to ensure that they are accessible, interoperable, and shared responsibly?
So I'll start if everyone's okay with that. NIST has a research data framework that they've created, and that sets the best practices. To be quite honest, interoperability of data and preparation for AI is a holy grail. It has been a holy grail since the 80s. How do we bring data together? How do we integrate all of it and bring it out to gain the best information we can? The standards that are created today are proprietary, frequently, and that is part of the global competitiveness, correct? So you don't necessarily want to remove that, but what you want to have is some baseline framework that you can use that everyone builds towards so that you can interoperate amongst the data sets and you can bring the data into tools like large language models or into new techniques in AI that you can automate the instrumentation. You want to be able to bring all of this data together and discover the key elements that are going to help advance biotechnology. And NIST has the ability to bring those kinds of people together through consortiums and federations of companies.
Do any of you want to add on?
I'll just add very briefly, one of the things, we work with a lot of different companies in the pre-competitive space, and they collaborate with each other even outside of NIMBLE, and they contract with each other outside of NIMBLE. And one of the pain points that we hear about is how they can exchange data with each other to facilitate their collaborations or to facilitate contract manufacturing, and that there is a significant amount of friction because every company has its own way of maintaining and storing data, and even within a company, different parts of the company have different ways of addressing that. So one of the projects that we've worked on inside NIMBLE is to establish an ontology, a framework for data that can be used as a way to translate data sets between organizations. Not that any one company has to use that ontology themselves, but if they know how to take their data formats and flip it into a common standard ontology, then that creates sort of that translation piece where they can then flip it into a partnership with another company. And that kind of open standard is something we rely very heavily on the NIST expertise in establishing these kinds of standards.
Go ahead, Dr. Endy.
The International Standards Organization meeting on biotechnology standards is happening right now in Australia. The largest delegation is from China.
Let's all go. Let's go.
I'm hearing that half of the proposals for new biotech standards are coming from China.
That's a problem.
I like what's in this report on NIST. I don't think it goes far enough. In my view, NIST should be resourced to create a biomeasurement laboratory to complement the physical measurement laboratory and the material measurement laboratory. This is a significant need, and it should support hundreds of scientists at NIST. Thank you.
That's it. And you think that this is something we should be funding and taking a...
It needs to be fully operational within 1,000 days, in my view.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with the other panelists. I think that there needs to be, in some domains within biology, it's not just we have the data, we need higher quality data, but we do need to think about expanding the data that we already have. And I think it starts at experimental standards to standards for metadata and data that then goes into databases that are accessible and well curated as well. And I think there's a role, definitely a role for NIST to play in all of that.
Very, very useful. Thank you. I thank you for all of that, and I think I will take those to heart. Because of lack of time, I will be submitting and building on my colleagues' question about also some of the important unique forensic and attribution capabilities of NBFAC, protecting U.S. biotechnology. So, Ms. Gracio, I'll be forwarding that in my questions to the committee. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the chairman of the Energy Subcommittee, Mr. Weber. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gracio, we're going to stick with you. I spoke with your boss, Director Steve Ashby, yesterday. He spoke pretty highly of you, by the way, just so you know. Anyway, I'm going to stick to biotechnology today. Can you elaborate on the importance of PNNL's foundational science capabilities and how they can be leveraged to deepen our understanding of some of these complex biological systems, particularly those that we need to master in order to eventually reach the commercialization stage?
Thank you, Chairman Weber, and thank you for the conversation you had with my boss. Hopefully that will help give me a little bit of a plus there, huh? So for 3 decades, DOE has really supported basic research at PNNL and at the other national laboratories to improve our ability to measure the molecules produced by microorganisms, such as bacteria and fungi, much like what we've been talking about today. This research has been foundational to the development of proteomics and metabolomics, which is the study of proteins and metabolites and these microorganisms that are produced. Because of this research, we can optimize the production of economically important chemicals through a fermentation process. So we can also measure the differences now between harmful and benign bacteria and fungi and begin to understand which proteins and metabolites make organisms harmful. At PNNL, we have been developing techniques to evaluate the presence of these small molecules in human cells and understanding and using these processes to assess soil and permafrost samples for the Department of Defense to determine whether there are novel organisms that could present threat to the warfighter. Without this basic science underpinning, we would not be able to translate the ideas and the concepts that I've talked about here into techniques, countermeasures, other mechanisms for understanding what's happening and what the warfighter might be exposed to. So that's one example of how basic science really can drive the outcomes both of biotechnology, but also in terms of helping our national security and our military.
Well, thanks for that. How do you see the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology's recommendations helping to address this critical challenge of adequately using basic science assets to advance that field?
I think there were some outstanding recommendations in the report that enhance and help understand what the Department of Energy can bring to bear on this problem. The investment in the infrastructure will amplify the science that's done by private industry. Oftentimes, we take on high risk, high reward, but highly hazardous work within the national laboratory system. By doing that, we can provide the basic sciences and the discoveries out to private industry through public-private partnerships that help them amplify the science and take it out to the next level. Getting through that valley of death is one of the biggest criterias, and it's the biggest challenges that both the research community and the private industry experience.
I'm going to stick with you, please, ma'am. In your written testimony, you note that, quote, the data, do you say data or data?
I say data.
Okay, you say them.
It's
you
okay.
Say,
Tomato,
you say
tomato.
I was going there. Yeah, rodeo. I'm Texan. So what's so funny? So anyway, you note that, quote, the data from DOE facilities can be used as a foundation for the web of biological data recommended in the SCEB report, end quote. Could you explain why facilities like the Joint Genome Institute, the Environmental Molecular Sciences Laboratory, EMSL, or other DOE facilities are particularly well suited to lay that foundation for a web, if you will, of biological data, please, ma'am?
Yes, absolutely. So each of those institutes you referred to and all of the projects within the DOE in terms of biology are open, innovative science projects. They're open science that is shared amongst the contributors of the science, amongst the performers, the researchers, the scientists, as well as with the open community. When you have that much data and information that's brought together, and you have the leadership class computing capabilities that I referred to in my testimony, you can start to bring the breadth of information together in a way that can create new discoveries. With AI, we're going to be able to explore that vast array of data in ways we've never been able to do before and identify and discover new outcomes that can enhance and inform biotechnology in the future.
Thanks. I'm going to very quickly come to you, Dr. Endy, really quickly. What keeps you awake at night?
Kids.
Okay, all right. All right, and whose fault was the kids? You had a part in that, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes, sir.
just checking.
Yes, sir. The fact that we're not considering biology as a strategic domain and acting accordingly soon enough to matter, both to secure it and for flourishing in our economy, we're just not getting it at the scale that it demands.
No, I appreciate that. And you're right on track with the kiddos, too. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from my colleague from California, unfortunately an MIT alum, but other than that, a lovely person. Ms. Rivas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I won't hold that you went to Caltech against you. But thank you for holding this important opportunity to hear from experts and focus on our efforts to assess the current biotech research and development ecosystem. But however, when assessing our current R&D ecosystem, it's hard to ignore the facts. The President's proposed fiscal year 26 budget cuts NSF funding by over $5 billion compared to fiscal year 24. There are cuts of nearly 30% for cross-agency biotechnology activities across NSF, and there are cuts to NSF's Directorate for Biological Sciences. These cuts are 71.5%, just to name a few. So that worries me in terms of our competitiveness. A lot of basic science research is funded by the federal government, and our scientists and researchers across the country rely on federal funding to get some of these innovations started. But my question is for Dr. Techman. My district is home to environmental justice communities that bear the brunt of climate change and pollution. Can you discuss the importance of federal funding to reduce pollution through new biotechnology use cases, such as bioremediation of plastic pollutants or biosensors for environmental monitoring?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the fundamental science is essential for us to begin to apply those technologies. A lot of what we have been doing in my lab has been understanding how microbes respond when the contaminant is present. And that gives us information to then think about how do we actually deploy these in situations when we need it. And I think with bioremediation, often we're dealing with the problem after it's already happened, but we need to know about the biology beforehand so that we're then equipped to then go out and use it. And as I said before, a lot of this is basic science. Knowing which organisms are there and what they're doing is a very fundamental question. And a lot of what we've been doing started with investments in understanding how microorganisms break down organic matter generally. And then we think about how does that then apply to oil or other contaminants. So I think it's essential that we know the basics to be able to then apply it.
And how important is federal funding to that research?
I think it's absolutely essential. I mean, I can speak to my own work. It was through an NSF project that started us thinking about organic matter and how microbes break it down that we then are able to then go apply it to other projects where we're doing things with it, building underwater batteries, cleaning up contaminated sites. And so I think federal funding is important to build that foundation of basic science so that we then can transition that.
And that is not something that is funded by industry, typically, right?
Often that initial investment comes from the federal government because the questions are very nascent. I think we need to know kind of where the foundation is before we can think about what the applications are. And I think federal funding de-risks the technology so that we can then work with industries to see how it applies.
No, I've seen many examples of that happening, across science, different science disciplines. And federal funding is the people that I've met with, researchers, they always say that's what got them started. And then they were able to transfer, to applications, to industries or other funders, right, that take this on. And so that's why I'm very concerned about, cuts to NSF and science research that the federal government is proposing, the president is proposing. Dr. Endy, can you speak to the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology's recommendation that Congress should expand educational efforts in biotechnology for American students, especially in expansion in community college and apprenticeship programs?
Thank you for your question. Just point out, when I do my napkin math, the proposed budget for NSF would bring us back to funding levels that were last seen in 1975 on a purchasing power basis. So for what that's worth. In terms of education, I think the BioBuilder Educational Foundation, of which I'm a director operating out of Massachusetts, does a great job working with high school teachers and local communities to build out facilities that help students at the high school level learn about biology and biotechnology. It's one of the best things going on. Some of their biggest successes have been in Eastern Tennessee, and looks like that could go across the whole country.
Okay. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We'll hear next from the gentleman from Illinois. Dr. Foster, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and all your colleagues on the Science Committee. I am now in the process of rejoining the Science Committee after many years. We're recovering from a demographic crisis where a bunch of newly elected members, like Ms. Rivas, in fact, are very enthusiastic about being on the Science Committee, thereby, bumping off members like me that have other responsibilities. And so I'm very grateful to be back. Now, one of the things that can really throw a crowbar into progress here is a biosecurity incident. And the things that scare me the most are desktop gene synthesis machines and just AIs expanding the access to expertise to people that, wouldn't otherwise have it. As Congress's token PhD physicist, I sort of serve as a lightning rod for a lot of the concerns on that. It was a little over 10 years ago, actually, that all of my science friends said, hey, there's been this incredible discovery called CRISPR-Cas9 that you guys are not ready for. So we actually had Jennifer Doudna sitting where you're sitting there. And one of the many things she told us about, besides the incredible potential, was the worries. I think at one of the hearings that we had, she described worries about how easy it would be to use CRISPR-Cas9 to knock out a cancer protective gene and what that might mean. And, and then in the decade since then, it's actually not been that bad. There were a lot of worries. About that time, I was invited to give the kickoff speech, and the National Academies had a series of meetings on human germline editing. And then I obviously there are things to worry about, big things to worry about, some of which came true. I don't think it's an accident that it was in China that you saw human germline editing take place in an underregulated environment. But it hasn't really been, and maybe the worst thing that's happened is now you see the Cornell lacrosse team genetically modified so they can actually win. But so that one hasn't been as bad as it has been, but I'm less sanguine about desktop gene synthesis and just the access to that. These large language models have been trained on everything that's ever been published on the internet, and there's a lot of expertise which, if combined properly, is very dangerous. The large language model chatbot providers say, "Oh, don't worry, we have them jailbreak. They're impossible to jailbreak," and that's demonstrably false. And I had a very scary demonstration of that recently from one of the AI safety interest groups, that they are not effectively jailbroken. And that is a big problem because they were giving instructions on how to resurrect dangerous pathogens with someone with sort of a high school level of expertise and giving advice on where you can buy this stuff in ways that you won't get caught. Really, really scary stuff. And so the other thing that worries me is the gene top synthesis, which is potentially an end run around all of the regulation and screening that we've made some attempt to set up. There was a letter from in Science Magazine from David Baker and George Church roughly a year ago, a little more than a year ago, on this. So I'm worried a lot about that. We're doing in just my artificial intelligence, we're trying to keep. There's a problem with the high-end AI engines being smuggled into China, the GPUs being smuggled into China. There's sort of an analogous need to control the hardware in desktop gene synthesis and to have very intrusive, inspection or real-time monitoring of what you're actually doing with that. The threat vector that worries me the most is the depressed grad student, frankly, which could just resurrect some pathogen or invent a new, even more dangerous one. So I was just wondering what you thought and I've been disappointed. I led a letter or co-led a letter with a number of my colleagues on this committee, and I don't think a lot has been done. Do you have any thoughts on what should be done and what could realistically be done on that? Yeah, Dr. Endy.
Thank you for your comments. I share your concern. I'm reminded of what happened 100 years ago in France and the United Kingdom coming out of World War I, and the struggles to figure out how to spend the limited, precious public treasure to secure the future of those countries. In France, they built the Maginot Line, imagining in part that the last war would be the way to get ready for the next war. And it's pretty impressive and almost worked, but we know it didn't work. Things are changing that are increasing risks in biology. And we face an important choice. We will either pretend that the way to secure biology going forward is to do what we've always been doing, or to get ready for what's coming, to secure biology really. And could we do that? So, for example, I'll be brief. Could you secure a future in which, in a worst-case scenario, anybody anywhere could access any pathogen or toxin? Not that we would ever wish for that to be happening, but if it's technically becoming possible, could we still realize, in an operational sense, biosecurity and public health? I believe the answer to that question is yes, but it starts with acknowledging that we've got some emerging trends, and the way to get to a secure future may not be to keep doing the same thing we've always been doing, but to really understand what's going on, acknowledge that reality, as General Jim Mattis would say, and get to a good security solution.
Okay, and I've exceeded my time here, but I just, if any of you, for the record, can just throw a few links. Don't write some new document, but throw a few links on a reading material that we should start absorbing on what we can realistically do on this, because it's a big deal. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. That concludes member questions. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their great questions. This has been a really fantastic hearing. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members. This hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you, sir. The comms team would like to take a picture of you with the witnesses.
Sure.
If you have time.
Yeah.